Thank you for coming. My name is Michel Mounayar. I am an architect and professor of architecture and associate dean at the College of Architecture Planning at Ball State University. It's also my distinct pleasure to be your host today for this conversation. I want to first salute the Meridian Institute, Mr. Scott Massey, and the Indianapolis Museum of Art for organizing what I think is a very critical session and conference today. I also want to thank Max for this wonderful launch for this session in the sense that really he's done our job. I think it was a great talk, and I really appreciate what he said today. I am also delighted to have with me a host of experts in their field and artists and that come to us from multiple places. First, I would like to present Minh Nguyen, author, novelist from the Department of English at Purdue University, and Mr. Kristian Andersen, IT entrepreneur, president and CEO of Kristian Andersen and Associates, and Mr. Michael Rushton, executive director, art administration program at Indiana University. Please join me in giving these folks an applause. Our session is entitled, How Does Art and Culture Provide a Competitive Advantage? I was asked to give a little bit of a sort of a statement of position or somewhat sort of start the conversation. Really, this is intended to be a free-flowing conversation, and I hope you all can join us as we get going. First, I just had a series of questions, obviously. One is, are we actually on the threshold, and this is kind of what we heard this morning, on the threshold of a new era and a different economy, one centered on the power of ideas rather than design. And I think our keynote speaker just really highlighted this notion. Second, is the pursuit of beauty and culture irrelevant to our prosperity, society, and our city? And I wrote these yesterday, I promise. I didn't just do them right now, but it's wonderful to hear Max, very, very strongly addressing this point. Third, is design thinking and methodology the path to solving complex problems? We often now are talking about wicked problems. These are problems that are very, very hard to solve, such as terrorism or possibly poverty and other kinds of things. Is the competitive edge no longer just defined by how elements are engineered, but by how well they respond to people as a total complex beings? In the sense that engineering is expected at this point. Things must work, things must be good, but they need to be a little bit more than that. As an architectural educator, I have the pleasure to work with the brightest minds coming to us from high schools from all over the nation and the world at Ball State. They come to us because we are known as a top architecture and planning school in the nation. We attract the best and brightest. They come to us because they are fascinated by the creative process. As all art and design schools, we depend on the century-old pedagogical model of the design studio. The studio is exciting, engaging, interactive, free, and alive. As a matter of fact, one of our biggest problems is that we're accused that we never leave our building. Our building is 24/7, and our students are there all the time. Betty Edwards, in her book, Right Side of the Brain, talks about the left side of the brain being numerical, exact, calculating, while the left side is imaginative, logical, timeless, meaning doesn't keep time very well, able to imagine what is not. It's the side of your brain that can get you to a destination while dreaming about this great golf game you had this weekend. I don't know if it ever happened to you guys, but it does happen a lot to me. And you say, whoa, how did I get here? Design methodology is now critical to almost all disciplines. Certainly engineering, law, and other professions have adopted this age-old sort of discipline and literally a method. As a matter of fact, in Washington, D.C., the environmental design community is trying to set up the equivalent of the National Science Foundation that I sit on, which is the National Academy for Environmental Design. So this is becoming a knowledge center, just like science and medicine. And I think it's important to note that design and art and creation have been very important to business and manufacturing as well. For example, I don't know if any of you remember the K car by Chrysler. The K car sort of appeared to me as it was drawn by a 3-year-old. You know, it was very boxy. You couldn't really sit in it. But I'm sure the K car could have gone through a wall like a Sherman tank without any problems and came out on the other side. But it didn't do well. At the same time, other products like Honda and other kinds of competitors were really investing not just in engineering, not just in understanding the market, but also in design. I don't know how many of you have noticed the change that, for example, a business like McDonald's is going through. And suddenly McDonald's is becoming really aware of the design process, and their organization of their franchise seems to be really reflecting that. Back to the students. The problem, and why I mentioned that we attract the brightest and the best, is because unfortunately they don't stay in Indiana. And that was really the reason. Because they are seeking free, urban, active places that feel engaging, fulfilling to them, and open to all to participate in. Perhaps we should start this conversation by exploring the specific act of creation and how the sort of creative process is actually engaging these young kids or engaging professionals. And I would like to sort of direct my first question to Big Minh. As a creative artist yourself, would you start our conversation by describing the creative process for you, how this process provides a transferable model for how innovation occurs in other areas like learning and entrepreneurship?
Thank you so much. My name is Bich Nguyen, and I am a writer of fiction and nonfiction, and I teach as a professor of English at Purdue University. And those two roles, as writer and professor, really go hand in hand, and it's no accident that I would say most artists, regardless of discipline, are associated in some way with the academy. The creative process, for me, is also very much associated with the academy. There's perhaps an old stereotype that a lot of people believe, and my parents, for instance, really believe that artists are just sort of strange people locked in an attic who produce work somewhere out of nowhere and suddenly burst onto the scene. I think that might happen every once in 150, 200 years or so, but for the most part, artists are perhaps born, but they are cultivated. And that is the role of education. It's the role of secondary education, certainly, but absolutely in college. And so as a professor, I see this all the time. I see freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and graduate students struggling to figure out how to put their creativity into practice. The creative process for writers involves collaboration in the form of a workshop. So writers might write alone, in the dark with their computer screen, but when it really comes to life is when the work is engaging other people, other readers. The workshop format we use in the academy and in general life involves other readers sitting around a table and discussing your work. Some people think it's critique, some people think it's tearing the work to shreds. Either way, it works because it lets the writer understand how the work is being perceived, and it makes them better thinkers, makes them better writers. And the process, in return, of being the one in the room to do the critiquing sharpens students and writers alike in terms of their critical thinking abilities. So that creative process is not a solitary one. It involves being with other people, it involves collaboration, it involves conversation and discussion and cultivation. And these are aspects of education that I'm really interested in and that I teach in my creative writing courses. Because we do not, as artists or as people, live in a vacuum or come from a vacuum. We are products of our childhoods and our environments and the culture in which we live. And art is one way to express what all of that means. It's one way to interpret our lives and where we think our nation is going. That all requires careful cultivation. If you're a writer, you don't just wake up and write. You wake up and read incessantly, and that is part of the creative process. Understanding the tradition of literature, understanding the tradition of writing, in order to make sense of it and possibly become a part of it. So the creative process for writers, and I think for artists in general, is very much one of community. And that is why community building and having the arts be a more significant part of any community is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Kristian, I don't know if you would like to add a little bit to this, but at the same time, I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you think art and culture give a competitive edge to a business like yours?
Yeah, well, so I will add 5 seconds. That's not true. It'll be 5 minutes to what was just shared. But there's been a lot of talking over the past 5 years about kind of turning design and creativity and ideation into a process. You mentioned design thinking. Our friends at IDEO and Tim Brown have basically created this idea out of the ether, and you now have universities, both in informatics and design and art, that are working on how to turn this into something that is worthy of academic study and, more importantly, worthy of pay by CEOs. This is part of the kind of artists' historic inferiority complex, in that they need to create something that is real and not just flaky in the ether. So design thinking is this idea, beginning to try to map the design process, right? Which, whatever. I guess there's parts of that probably it's worthy spending a few cycles on that. But the truth of the matter is that design is, and let's design, creativity, innovation, I would argue those are all the same thing. I would argue that what the design and innovation is about creating new value. And specifically, it's not about creating brand new things, because pretty much, as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. So it's really about where things intersect, which is why I think the creative process is really about feeding your brain or your studio or the lives of your staff people or what have you with as much sometimes seemingly unrelated stimuli as possible.